Kate, so lovely to see you. Thank you so much for joining me. And those who are not watching the video, you're looking very glamorous in red today. It's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria.
So listen, before we dive deep and I really pick your brains and get some expertise from you, I'd really love to understand what got you interested in sort of looking into the future, in looking at what is going on. What fascinated you about that?
Well, I guess being in the industry for 20 years as a consultant, initially a trend consultant, looking at trends predominantly in retail, hospitality and experiences, and now latterly just a sort of broader, not just retail, but consumer behaviour, big tech changes. You can't, it just naturally happens. I mean, what happens in retail is really indicative of what's happening for the whole economy, because it's the most competitive sector of all. Therefore, its experiences for the consumer are at the most advanced and have to change the most quickly. So it is a highly adaptive and highly technology-driven industry that informs pretty much everything else in terms of the way we live and the way our cities work, the way we as consumers, as people, engage with the world, the internet, technology, and everything that we do in our lives. So I suppose as a young person, I will admit, a bit of a trekker. If you grow up loving Star Trek and science fiction as I did, and sort of being very engaged by all the sort of robotics and all of that kind of stuff, then you just can't help as a grown-up get involved or get interested in artificial intelligence, machine learning, what is happening at that outer edge. I mean, I just can't get my head around quantum computing, but I would love to at one point. I'm just not clever enough, unfortunately. But artificial intelligence is absolutely key to what we need to know about. And so, that is the future. That's what's creating this fourth industrial revolution that is, crafting the new world in which we all live. So, yeah, I guess you just can't help it if you're sort of looking as a business futurist at technology. You just have to be interested in the future.
I love the fact that you're a trekker. When you said I'm a trekker, I was thinking, sort of trekking, walking. I didn't think you were going to say Star Trek. That's wonderful, lovely. I love that.
Don't tell anyone else I told you that.
Well, I think a few people might know now. I love that. I also love the insight there, which I hadn't thought about it in that way, but you're absolutely right that retail does shape everything else. I hadn't thought about it. And interestingly enough, you may not know, but I started my life in retail, and I think it's one of the hardest places to be, and you're right, you have to be incredibly aware of what's going on and very proactive as well as reactive. So that's really interesting. So here's a big one here for you. What do you think the lasting impact of COVID-19 is going to be on the retail sector?
Well, we have an assembly of characters that we've gathered as a result of this pandemic, which brings to us a much wider range of views than we would normally access. So historians, sociologists, journalists, experts in artificial intelligence, CEOs, etc., so that we can get some really alternate views on what's going to be the big impact of this pandemic. And essentially what we learn from the historian is that wars and existential crises that impact people tend to just accelerate the existing trends that were there. Now, I know this is not rocket science, everybody could guess this, but it is actually shown to be the case by looking at previous crises. And so in retail, we are basically seeing an exponential increase in what was already happening before. Last year, you may be familiar that 2019 was the worst year on record for UK retail. There was an actual contraction in the economy for retail, and that was the first time that's happened in 30 years. So I'm afraid, my job is to be inspirational and to give people great ideas about how to make things better for the future. But we do have to acknowledge that there is an extraordinary contraction that is taking place. I mean, we are in a position where potentially 30 million people around the world are going to be unemployed for a period of time. And we see the potential of up to 30% GDP contraction worldwide. So, it would be daft of us to pretend that there isn't going to be a significant correction. There will be fewer retail stores, there will be more e-commerce, there'll be more automation, there'll be more job losses than there already were, and there were a lot already in retail. However, there will be winners, and there will be changes which are ultimately better for the consumer, because the things that will go will be the things that weren't really working anyway.
And actually, I'm so glad you said there will be winners, because I was beginning to get a bit stressed there, because I do like a bit of retail therapy. Can you give us examples of what winners there may be and what losers there may be?
Of course, well, we already know, because we can see the sales figures for now, that anything to do with home working, the desks and the chairs and the laptops, all the electronics that we need for home working, because we've got 500 million people around the world working from home during this period. So gardening, DIY, live streaming, entertainment, exercises, exercise equipment, all of that's been massively on the up. Of course, grocery has been robust and resilient. Of course, we still need to eat. And in fact, we're obviously consuming more because we're consuming it at home. Anything where you're using some scratch cooking, so, utensils, purchasing those kind of farmers boxes or those sort of scratch cooking boxes that get delivered home, they're all off the scale. You can't even join those anymore if you're not already a customer. So, dark kitchens, which we already saw a lot of, but that will grow, I think, exponentially in the future, because although I think we'll continue to cook more, because we've learned to cook, a lot of people, we've realized how much cheaper that is than eating out 4 times a week or getting your deliveries all the time. So I think that will be sort of robust into the future, but people will, of course, also have deliveries coming home, much more so than they'll be going to restaurants, at least in the initial kind of return period. So I think, growth in all of those things that are to do with making your home better, making it more comfortable, because now it's a gym, it's an office, it's so many more things, and people will, really want to upgrade their home environment. Of course, I know not everyone can work at home. I'm talking about white collar workers that can. We have to think about people who can't work from home as well. Of whom there are many millions. But I do think that there will be some serious winners in the future. They'll mostly be to do with the e-commerce side of things. So, anything to do with data analytics, application of machine learning to that data in order to make deliveries and logistics more efficient for e-commerce retailers. The kinds of software that produce avatars that improve fit so that you can purchase online with more kind of reliable understanding of, something fitting you. All of those kind of sectors will be absolutely in growth phase. But there are many others. I mean, just off the top of my head, we'll see, for example, drive-ins. We'll get sort of more kind of drive-through restaurants, more drive-in cinemas, things which you can do within your own space, within your own car, for example, if you have one. So there will be a lot of winners, but they will be predominantly on the e-commerce side, on the digital side, on the software provision side. And I do think physical retail is not going to go away. I mean, women love shopping. For us, it's kind of hunting and gathering. I've never had a woman ask me, will there be no shops in the future because we'll all just shop online? No, we won't just shop online. Right now, it's sort of, 20% online, 80% in stores. That is probably going to not completely reverse, but it could easily go up to 30 or 35% online purchases. And therefore, we will have a commensurate shrinkage of physical retail. But the retail that remains will be better. It will be the shopping rather than the buying. If you think buying is a sort of low engagement, relatively boring stuff, that's gone online and automated replenishment in many cases. So what remains is the more experiential, the fun, be involved in learning, in meeting people, in trialing, in testing, and all of that will remain. I mean, basically that's your Selfridges type model, which is a department store, a very challenged sector. I think in many cases, department stores that are not crucibles of culture in the way that, say, Selfridges is, and not highly experiential in that they're different every time you go back, those will be the first to go, I'm afraid, because they're highly leveraged. They are very disadvantaged by their size, the cost of rates and rent, staffing. They're often owned by private equity who are not in a position to invest and make them full kind of omni-channel machines that can fully respond to the new technology requirements of tomorrow's consumer. So, you know, there'll be winners and losers, but the winners that remain will be much more fun, much more interesting for the consumer, quite often small and independent with unique offers, which will regenerate in some respects a high street that will be very different. So the high streets won't be purely for retail anymore. They will be for leisure, community, they'll be for residential, they'll be smaller, and, you know, they will still exist, but they will be very different.
I love the fact that you're going to say it's a better experience and it's going to be, you know, better, higher quality. I love all that. I love the fact the high streets will remain. That's wonderful. That's really great news. And as a woman, I would never ask the question, you know, is retail dead? Because yes, I want to go shopping as soon as I can. I actually want to go to the hairdresser as soon as I can, but that's another topic. So tell me, do you see the big picture of consumption and what we will be consuming changing overall as well?
Yes, I do. I do think that to be a grown-up in this era is to have changed our perspective significantly. I do think that we'll be thinking differently about consumption. I personally have been seeing this coming for some time, and I try to make sure that I avoid the kind of bias that each of us naturally has. But I do think we will be readdressing things like the fast fashion cycles that we've become accustomed to. If fast fashion is not good enough to be worth making available on e-commerce because the margins are too low for it to be able to absorb the cost of returns and then putting those returns back into the supply chain, if it's not good enough to be worth doing that, because you know it's just going to go into landfill if it's returned, then I do actually question whether that is worth selling in the first place. And I think that more and more consumers will also start to question those economies which are almost straight to landfill. So I think that we will start to be more considerate of what we buy. We will have to buy less in many cases because we will simply have less money because there'll be so many more people, you know, subject to recessionary forces. And therefore, we'll be more considered. There is a more concern about the environment. We've had nice, clean, fresh air for a while. We've gotten used to that. I think we care about it more. We realise that it has an impact on our health. You know, higher pollution levels, higher virus levels. So I think we will see that growth in consumer concern about purpose, about the environment, about sustainability of their products, of their packaging, of their circularity of systems. You know, we're seeing interesting developments in the FMCG area with the likes of Loop. And although there are potentially short-term hygiene issues with having kind of returnable packaging, I mean, they do get washed, I do think that ultimately we will see the return of older fashion systems like milkman type systems, which are sustainable and they are good for the consumer. They are also convenient, and if they're delivered by somebody on a push bike, they're also extremely healthy for the environment. So or an e-car, for example. So I do think that there will be big changes in expectations for continuous growth in economies. I also think that people will question some of these very complex international supply chains. And, for an iPhone to require 43 different countries to be in its supply chain, I think no longer looks particularly clever. For 90% of the UK's paracetamol to come from one country, India, that's no longer looking that clever either. So I think what we'll see is a consumer demand for more local, more seasonal, more stable supply chains that are probably shorter and simpler. And I think obviously it's not necessarily a good thing to, revert to a sort of protectionist nationalism. That's a very bad thing, bad politically, socially, and economically. But I do think there'll be movements around the margins of that. And so, in practical terms, supermarkets will gain a lot of traction by saying, look, our produce is grown in this country and it has shorter air miles and, it's seasonal and therefore it's better for our ecology. I think those messages will increasingly play well, and consumers will expect that greater simplification of supply chains, more onshoring of things which are considered to be politically crucial if we were to enter into another crisis situation. And I think many people are being, a little bit over optimistic and thinking, we'll be out of this in a few weeks, then there'll be a vaccine and it's all back to normal. It's probably not going to be back to normal for quite some time. There may well be a sort of reversal quite frequently where we go back into lockdowns, at least in local pockets. We're not all going to get out of this at the same time in the same way. So I think we will have to learn as businesses and consumers and retailers and brands to work with the cadences of greater and lesser freedom and find ways to work around the times when we have lesser freedom.
Wow, that was a masterclass there, Kate. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm really happy about a lot of the positives, certainly about, supporting local farms, local milkmen. I couldn't get on the list for my milkman, but I know what you're talking about. So there are some great positives there. I didn't know some of the stats you shared about, paracetamol. That's shocking. I had no idea. And also about the iPhone. That's amazing. So there's some great positives. I also agree with you. I don't think it's going to be a few weeks. At the time of recording this, I think we're in week 8 of lockdown, aren't we? Or is it week 7? I don't know. I've lost days and track, but we're in the middle of May. So tell me, we've been focusing on retail and looking at the bigger picture of consumers and what's going to be changing. One of the other industries that's been really hit is the travel industry. Do you see any short or long-term implications for what might happen there?
Yes. Actually, we were very surprised to see a 9% increase in bookings for next March 2021 for cruise liners, which you might have thought would be one of specifically, in fact, the area of travel that might have taken longer than 1 year to recover. But no, people who love cruising. And there is a massive revenge spend pent up of people that are just desperate to get out and get back to what they know they love. And people do also have very short memories, in truth. So there's revenge spend for as soon as we're allowed out. Many people are saying, I'm off as soon as the legal restriction ends, without regard to their personal, health and so on. So I do think that leisure travel will bounce back very quickly. It'll cost more because we'll have lost some airlines, we'll have lost capacity in that area. So it will become more of a kind of luxury discretionary purchase, but people will still do that if they can possibly afford it, because we're not going to give up our holidays. But I'm afraid business travel is not going to recover in anything like the same sort of way. Let's face it, I've spent a lifetime. I've spent 4 months of my life every year for about 17 years traveling around America on business trips on my own, hotel to hotel, city to city, for one-to-one meetings with people. Really? I was always thinking, could we not just do this by webinar? and, cut my carbon footprint, give me more of a home life. But nobody would accept that. Well, that has now changed, hasn't it? We've all learned webinars are perfectly sufficient for one-to-one meetings. I do think that people won't travel for one-to-one meetings for business for a very long time or ever. But I do think people will revert to traveling for conferences. Now, I know I possibly would say that, wouldn't I? Because I'm a conference speaker. But no, I genuinely do think this because, and I full, I just, what can you say? People don't only go to conferences to listen to speakers. I do know that. That's kind of the hook that gets them in. But the real reason people go to conferences for business is, to meet their colleagues, to do deals in the bar afterwards, to hear what their competitors are saying, to be a part of it, to gain cultural capital because they've picked up sound bites that make them sound interesting over dinner with their boss. I mean, these are all the things that you can't really get from a one-to-one webinar where you're sort of taking notes and learning factoids. So I think, I genuinely do think that conferences will recover as soon as it's healthy to do so. And that's never going to go away. And, rock concerts are not going to go away either. There's something fundamental to human need that is about getting like-minded people together to collaborate and to, play and discuss and so on. So, that's travel, that's flights. There will be a lot of consolidation, I'm afraid. I fear for what's going to happen to my air miles with various large players who I hope survive, but I'm not I'm not counting on it. But for hotels, who are obviously also very challenged, I think we'll see much greater emphasis in the medium term on homegrown travellers, so people from their own local city and their own national consumers. So I think those hotels will have to, in many cases, pivot. For example, if you're an airport hotel and you're not getting business travel for a long time, if ever, and you're not in a particularly glamorous spot that people would go to for the environs, you have to become something special as a destination in yourself. So we'll see hotels becoming the hotel for gamers, or the hotel for advanced webinar services. Some of the rooms are for sleeping in, some of the rooms are for full soundproofing kind of teleconferencing or podcasting studios, or spaces where Joe Wicks type people go and do their workouts to their camera and are feeding their consumers because they can't do it in their own living room. So, and some of them will become gastronomic destinations that they weren't before. They will have to pivot. And in many cases, we've already seen those pivots. So Airbnb, as you may know, did these experiences where you'd pay 20 quid or something and you'd go to San Francisco and you'd go to the kitchen and you'd be shown how to make bread, or you'd be taken on a tour of a goat farm or something like that in Peru. Obviously you can't do that now, but they've already pivoted and they've gone online with those experiences. So you actually still pay potentially quite a lot, $50, but you're one of a group of 8, live at a particular time, talking to a Olympic gold medalist about, fortitude or, resilience or something like that. So people are still paying for digital services within the travel industry in the meantime, while we all wait for everyone to get going again.
Fantastic, absolutely fantastic. I love the idea of revenge spend. I've never heard that, and I like that. And the short memory thing I completely relate to, because I've got a very short memory, which is why you see me taking profuse notes while you're talking, because you're giving so much gold here. Good news about conferences, obviously. I run a speaker bureau. Thank you for that. That makes me feel a lot better. Thank you. And this hotel, what a lovely idea to have a hotel for gamers, or a hotel for, doing doing your webinar or your podcast or your Joe Wicks workout. How fantastic. I might have to let Joe Wicks know that idea. I think that's really fascinating, really fascinating. Thank you. So leads me on to something you talked about earlier. You talked about the fact that, you know, we're working from home. Our partners are working from home. White collar workers are able to work from home. Do you think we'll ever go back to the office again?
I actually think that almost no white collar worker will ever again be expected to be in the office full time. You know, I'm willing to stick my neck out and say that I really do think that era has gone. And I'm not the only one. I think it was the CEO of Barclays who recently in the press said the era of 7,000 people turning up in Canary Wharf to sit in a great big huge office is over. I mean, we ourselves have given up our lease because it came to an end after 25 years. We've been in one office, which I'm giving my age away there. And it comes to an end at the end of this month. And so, you know, which is quite handy actually, because we're realizing what an enormous amount of money we were paying for those rates and that rent and the Wi-Fi and all the rest of it. And, you know, you realize overnight there's been an overnight shift in our understanding that we can, if we are screen-based, knowledge-based workers as we are, you can do everything at home. So what I think we will see is a significant contraction in the shared office space sector. I'm quite glad I'm not a shareholder in WeWork. I think they'll need to pivot if they are to continue into We Live, which will obviously take change of planning use, involvement by local government, which must happen. People need housing more than they need offices these days. And young people like living and working in a communal space. So it's a no-brainer for that industry to pivot in that direction. I also think more companies that are relatively sort of smallish, not thousands of people, will be like us, and they'll be thinking, well, we don't need an office full time, we like working at home, but we'd like to get together 1 or 2 days a week. We don't want to pay a full membership for hot desking or a private space for 5 days a week. So I think we'll start to see more fractional contracts being made available. And I think the facilities will have to change as well. So Staples in the US, you know, big warehouse selling paper and stationery, obviously they successfully pivoted. They recognized that their business was not going to be the future. And so they changed to be a sort of co-working office space. And since then they've pivoted again. And now they're podcasting studios, webinar studios, legal services, consultancy services, accountancy help. So, you know, that is a great example of a pivot that shows foresight of where things were going, because they'd already done that. They'll now just expedite that. So I think we will see greater uptake of things like AR and VR. So there's been a sort of slow growth in the use of, you know, headsets, you know, HoloLenses and Magic Leaps and, you know, all those kinds of things. And there's been difficulties with they're heavy or they're sweaty. You don't want to use one in a public space, you know, other people's germs and so on. And even at home, $3,500, they're not cheap. But we are now on the cusp of natural form-fitting glasses, not great big headsets, which are going to be available for $500, not $3,500. And, you know, they're coming out of China. They do a lot of the same things as the more expensive versions. And there is now software that can put people via their avatars into a room with their colleagues to collaborate on work projects, almost as if they were together in the same room. So I think that we have this kind of golden era of the technology's arrived, 5G is arriving, the hardware is there, the software is there, and the demand is there. So if I had a big international team, which I'm quite pleased I don't anymore, we've gone all artificial intelligence now, and we have fewer people, but it still manages to do the same work. I would still think about having, people having heads-up displays, putting them in a room virtually, and still operating together as a team. It's all like Minority Report. It works really well. And we know that in the US, one of the world's biggest realtor companies, I think they're called eXp Realty, they have 20,000 agents worldwide, but no offices at all. But they spend up to 20 hours, 30 hours a week in a virtual campus, like Google. And they're there for training, they're there for meetings, they engage with each other, their avatars are there, which you just take a photo of yourself in 2D and then it renders you into 3D instantly. I mean, it's amazing now, this new technology. So once you're aware that that exists alongside other, systems like Slack and other organizational software, you think, do we really need to be spending this money on, $14,000 a year per person for an office in New York? I don't think so.
No, fantastic. I mean, you may not know this, but my team and the London Speaker Bureau global company is all virtual. It's been virtual from day one. There is a very small head office, but everybody works either in cafes or from home. So I'm used to working from home, and so for me, it's makes absolute sense. I love the fact that AR and VR is going to be affordable. I'm looking forward to having these goggle things, these glasses, and as you say, it's like something off sci-fi. It's going back to the Trekkie question at the beginning, isn't it now? We've made full circle. And as we've made full circle, as we've come full circle, because we've run out of time, Kate, I could talk to you all day. What's the final thought, a nice final positive outlook after after post-COVID-19, whenever that may be, that you could leave us with?
I do think that when big things happen, we make big changes because humans are extremely adaptable. And, commercial people in particular have to be very adaptable, especially if they're selling things to other people, because that's always been very competitive. So I think we were inexorably moving towards a much more omnichannel world anyway. And that's just going to happen faster. And what technology brings us with it, all of its sort of potential negatives, it does bring, I do believe, the opportunity for everyone to benefit from, cheaper, more sustainable power, more convenience, a better life-work balance. If you think about it, I mean, many people have actually preferred working from home, haven't they? Giving up that commute, that was never fun. The longer days, we now have the opportunity for reconnecting with the people in our lives, spending more time with family because we're perhaps not commuting as much. That changes the opportunity for the design of our cities in a way that is more human-centered. I think we now are beginning to realize that economic growth at all costs doesn't make us any happier. We do have to think, do we need all this stuff, or can we live with less? And if we have less, why don't we just make it better and make it better and more sustainable for the planet? So I think now is an opportunity for reset in politically, sociologically, economically, certainly in terms of the environment. And I also think from a customer experience and customer service perspective, we've learned so much during this crisis, and so many businesses have pivoted so quickly that, it's been amazing to see their levels of innovation. And clearly those who have pivoted quickly are going to be the ones that, kind of rule the world in the future. And I think in many cases, it will be better for the consumer.
That is a wonderful note to leave this on. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.